Hello and welcome to Neo Psychology with me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. Today we're carrying on with the attachment unit and we're looking at lesson 6, the learning theory of attachment. Let's get started. Starter. Food is the way into someone's heart. Agree or disagree? Why not? Is food the way into your heart? Why? Why is it? Why isn't it? Right? That's what we're going to be exploring today. We've got 3 learning objectives today. 1, show comprehension and apply knowledge of attachment through classical conditioning. Then we're going to have a look at attachment through operant conditioning. And then we're going to be able to discuss and evaluate the learning theory of attachment itself. Okay? So far, none of this means anything to us, but we will progress, I promise you. Let's start with learning objective 1. Attachment through classical conditioning. There are many different approaches to understanding behavior, which was covered in the module of approaches. One of the major approaches in the learning is the learning theory approach, also known as behaviorism, which proposes that certain behaviors are innate, such as crying when you feel pain. But beyond such simple stimulus response associations, learning theorists or behaviorists claim that behavior is learned through experience. Therefore, attachment is learned through experience. According to the behaviorist or the learning theorist, they suggest we are born as a blank slate, tabula rasa, and everything that makes you who you are is through your experiences. Everything that you have done, all of your experiences, all of the things that you have done in your life, that's what made you who you are. Your genes and anything else that's innate has not made you who you are, right? You are born as a blank slate, and everything that you do in life determines who you are, and everything that makes you who you are is learned. It's a learned thing. So what they suggest is attachment is learned. You're not born with this innate need to attach to someone. You actually learn to be attached. Now, learning theory dominated psychology in the first half of the 20th century. So in the 1940s and 50s, their theory of attachment was the key explanation. In psychology, if anyone asked, why do babies form attachments? They would look at the learning theory. Okay? They used the principles of conditioning to explain how an infant becomes attached to a mother figure. Note that the word conditioning essentially means learning, okay? You become conditioned to attach to the mother, you learn the attachment. Learning theorists John Dullard and Neil Miller in 1950 proposed that caregiver-infant attachment can be explained by the learning theory. Their approach is sometimes called a cupboard love approach because it emphasizes the importance of the caregiver as a provider of food. Put simply, the learning theory of attachment proposes that children learn to love whoever feeds them. Okay? It's a very simplistic theory, right? That's what they believe. The learning theory or the behaviorists suggest, well, babies become attached to whomever feeds them. It's learnt through love, okay? They learn to love whoever feeds them, okay? And if you think about it, it did make sense at the time, You would have babies and they would form attachments to their mothers. And then they'll go, right, what does the mother do that they become attached to? Why are they becoming attached to mothers? They'll go, right, what does the mother do? Well, the mother feeds the baby. Okay, brilliant. That makes sense, right? The mother feeds the baby forms an association with the food, which becomes associated with the mother, and now the baby likes the mother, right? However, as we're going to find out later on, it may not be that simple. But let's have a look. Attachment through classical conditioning. Classical conditioning involves learning to associate 2 stimuli together, so that we begin to respond to one in the same way as we already respond to the other. In the case of attachment, food serves as an unconditioned stimulus. Being fed gives us pleasure. We don't have to learn that. It's an unconditioned response. Okay? So the food is an unconditioned stimulus, okay? You don't have to learn to like food. We just like food, okay? And the caregiver or the mother starts off as a neutral stimulus, a thing that produces a neutral response or no specific response. When a baby's born, it doesn't have an attachment yet, okay? So according to learning theory, they would say that the mother is a neutral stimulus. The mother doesn't mean anything at the moment. But when the same person, the mother, provides the food over time, they become associated with food. So the food and the mother get paired together. When the baby sees this person, there is an immediate expectation of food. The neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus. Once conditioning has taken place, the sight of the caregiver or the mother produces a conditioned response of pleasure. To a learning theorist, this is love and how attachments are formed, okay? Now, who was it that initially came up with this idea of classical conditioning, learning through association? Who was it? Ivan Pavlov. Yes, with the dogs. Good. The dogs and the bells and the food. And it's the same way, right? They're suggesting that attachment is formed through association. You associate the mother with the pleasure of food to the point where the mother becomes the conditioned stimulus and gets a conditioned response of happiness, of pleasure, as you would with food. So, here's the first task. On the right is a diagram illustrating Pavlov's original study of salivating dogs. So you can see the food is an unconditioned stimulus that gets the unconditioned response of salivation or maybe happiness. The bell is a neutral stimulus. You ring the bell, it doesn't mean anything, right? It gets no conditioned response. The bell is nothing, okay? If I rang a bell right in your face, that doesn't mean anything because it hasn't been conditioned to mean anything yet. But the bell and the food are associated together. They're linked together. They're paired together constantly. So give the food, ring the bell, give the food. And because the food is there, you get the unconditional response of salivation or happiness. Okay? After conditioning though, the bell has now been associated with food. So now ringing the bell, which was the neutral stimulus, has now become the conditioned stimulus, which gets the conditioned response of salivation or happiness. What I want you to do is redraw the whole set of labels and illustrations as if you were explaining how classical conditioning can explain attachment behavior. Okay? Redraw those 4 steps, the 2 steps before conditioning, one during and one after. No one should be drawing dogs and bells. There's no bells or dogs in this scenario. Try and replace what you think goes in it, alright? Give it a go. Give yourself 5 minutes. Actually, give it a go because I'm about to go through the answer now. Okay, so this is what it should have looked like. Something along these lines, okay? Let's go through it step by step. So, before conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus of food produces or triggers an unconditioned response of pleasure or happiness. Babies like food. Everyone likes food. You give a baby food, they will feel pleasure because they like the taste of food and you are taking away the pain of hunger. Okay? So babies like food. That's before conditioning. Again, before conditioning, the mother was a neutral stimulus. Okay? And produces no response from the baby, a neutral response. The baby hasn't formed an attachment yet and has no response towards the mother. So this is before any attachment's been made. The mother is just a neutral stimulus. Doesn't mean anyone. During conditioning, the mother and the food are paired or associated together. Okay, the neutral stimulus of the mother are experienced together with the unconditioned stimulus of food, right? They are pairing it together. The baby forms an association between the mother and food. When the baby feels the pleasure of the food and hunger stops, his mother is always present. The mother and food are being paired together until the point where after conditioning, the neutral stimulus of the mother now triggers the same response as the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. Now the neutral stimulus, the mother, is now the conditioned stimulus, which triggers a conditioned response of happiness or pleasure. the baby now shows happiness in the presence of the mother, which learning theorists would describe as the formation of an attachment and love. This is how babies form attachment. This is how babies form love. It's through whomever feeds them. It's the cupboard love theory, because you open the cupboard and you feed the baby and the baby loves you back. Okay? That is attachment through classical conditioning. That's how the learning theorist or the behaviorist would explain why babies form attachments to their mothers. Quite a simplistic way of looking at things, if you ask me. I've got a joke. One dog says to the other, "Does the name Pavlov ring a bell?" The other dog says, "No, but it makes my mouth water." Okay, and that's attachment through classical conditioning. Identify one thing you learned about attachment through classical conditioning. Why do you think learning about attachment through classical conditioning is important? How does attachment through classical conditioning apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? And do you have any other questions of your own? Otherwise, that is attachment through classical conditioning. That's one part of the learning theory. The other part is what we're going to learn now. Attachment through operant conditioning. Now, remember, attachment through classical conditioning, association. They both have the "as" in the word, okay? Classical conditioning, association. Classical conditioning, learning through association. Operant conditioning is learning through consequence, reinforcements and punishments, okay? Let's have a look at attachment through operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is another learning principle of the behaviorist approach. It works on the principle of learning by consequence. Now, there are two consequences, reinforcement and punishment. Now, the consequence of reinforcement leads to an increase in the probability of a behavior being repeated. If you do something and it gets reinforced or rewarded, then you're going to do it again. The consequence of punishment leads to a decrease in the probability of behavior being repeated. If you do a certain behavior and it gets punished, you're less likely to do it again. So, we've got two consequences here. Operant conditioning is learning through consequence, yes, and there are two consequences, reinforcements and punishments. Okay. Now, operant conditioning can explain why babies cry for comfort. An important behavior in building attachment. Crying leads to a response from the caregiver. For example, feeding. As long as the caregiver provides the correct response, crying is reinforced. The baby then directs crying for comfort towards the caregiver, who responds with comforting social suppressor behavior. Now, this reinforcement is a two-way process. At the same time as the baby is reinforced for crying, the caregiver receives negative reinforcement because the crying stops. Escaping from something unpleasant is reinforcing. What type of reinforcement is that? Positive or negative? Negative reinforcement, because you're removing something that's unpleasant. This interplay of mutual reinforcement strengthens an attachment. Now, all of that is quite complicated, so I've made a little animation to help it make sense. Okay? So here's a scenario. This is how attachment is formed through operant conditioning. Okay? It's a little bit complicated. Take your time. If you need to rewind it, but I'm about to go through it now. Baby is crying because he is hungry. Okay? The mother positively reinforces the baby's behavior of crying with a reward of food. At the same time, the mother receives negative reinforcement because the crying stops. This interplay of mutual reinforcement strengthens an attachment. So, when the baby cries for food and the mother feeds the baby, both the mother and the baby are being reinforced. Okay? The mother positively reinforces the baby with a reward of food. positive reinforcement, she's adding something on, she's giving some food. And at the same time, the mother receives negative reinforcement because the baby stops crying. Negative reinforcement taking something away. The baby is removing that bad thing of crying, which is a good thing. It's reinforcement. And it's that interplay of mutual reinforcement that strengthens an attachment. And that is how attachment is formed through operant conditioning, according to the behaviorists. Right, application question. We're going to apply our knowledge to a scenario now about Cheska's choice. Here we go. Cheska is a baby. Her family is very well off, and her mother has enlisted the help of a nanny to help with practical care. Cheska is bottle fed, and most of her feeds are administered by the nanny. Cheska's mother works part-time, so Cheska spends approximately the same number of hours a week with her mother as she does with her nanny. The nanny is mostly interested in practical care, whereas when Cheska's mother is with her, she plays with her and spends a lot of time cuddling. Here's the question. Cheska's mother is concerned that she will get more attached to her nanny because she usually feeds her. Based on your understanding of the learning theory, should she be worried? And then number 2, based on what you learn about attachment from Schaefer and Emerson's research and Harlow's research that we learned last lesson, how would you explain to Cheska's mother that she might not need to worry? Right? 5 minutes, application question, apply your knowledge to that answer. Make sure to include parts of the question. If you can quote parts of the question in your answer, that's even better. Give that a go now. 2 questions, 5 minutes. Huzzah! And we'll go through the answer now. So number 1, Cheska's mother is concerned that she'll get more attached to her nanny because she usually feeds her. Based on your understanding of the learning theory, should she be worried? According to the learning theories of attachment, Cheska's mother should indeed be worried that Cheska is likely to get more attached to the nanny than her mother. Cheska may come to associate her nanny, a neutral stimulus, with food, an unconditioned stimulus. As a conditioned stimulus, the nanny will produce a learned pleasure response and so be an attachment figure. According to the learning theory of attachment, whomever feeds the baby is the one the child will become attached to. And since the nanny feeds Cheska, Cheska should become attached to her. But, based on what you learnt about attachment from Schaefer and Emerson and Harlow, how would you explain to Cheska's mother that she might not need to worry? Right. The learning theory is not a good explanation for attachment. Attachment research conducted by Schaefer and Emerson and Harlow shows that babies attach to those that cuddle and interact with them rather than those who feed them. Therefore, based on attachment research, Cheska's mother has nothing to worry about. Okay? As we saw in Harlow's research, the monkeys became attached to the mother that provided them with contact comfort, not the one that provided them with food. Okay? And that's attachment through operant conditioning. Identify one thing you've learned about attachment through operant conditioning. Why do you think learning about this is important? It's not just to pass exams, right? How might this help us in real life? Who is this information useful to? And do you have any more questions? And that is attachment through operant conditioning. Tick. Now we're going to evaluate. Can we discuss and evaluate the learning theory of attachment? Are there any strengths? Are there any limitations? Right? What is good about this theory? What is bad about this theory? Is there any supporting research? Is there any conflicting research? Right. Complete the 3 evaluative points of the learning theory of attachment. We've learned lots of contradictory evidence to the learning theory already in what we've learned so far in the attachment unit. So, what I want you to do is complete the evaluative points. I've started with the point and the first part of the evidence. You need to finish off the evidence, explain why it's a limitation, and then conclude whether this shows that, or we can conclude from this. Okay? So, the first one limitation of the learning theory explanation of attachment is that there is counter evidence from animal studies. Lorenz's study of geese found that what? What did Lorenz find? Explain why that's a weakness, why that's a limitation, and then this shows that. Additionally, additional research into animal behavior found more conflicting evidence. Harlow's 1959 research on deprived monkeys demonstrated that. What did Harlow demonstrate? How does it conflict with the learning theory of attachment? And then this shows that. This means that. And then finally, furthermore, conflicting evidence was not just found with animal studies. Schaefer and Emerson's research into human attachment found that what? What did Schaefer and Emerson find? We can conclude from this that what? Okay? Finish off those evaluative points. And that's the evaluation. Okay? Those are 3 evaluative points, 3 conflicting pieces of evidence. Finish those off in your booklets. We're on to the plenary now. Okay, research methods. Okay? A team of attachment researchers are interested in whether feeding influences attachment. The team believe that mothers and babies who have difficulty breastfeeding are less likely to develop good quality attachments. They asked for volunteers from a hospital where mothers who struggle with breastfeeding attend feeding support groups. At 1 year from birth, these mother-baby pairs and a control group are assessed for attachment. Okay, 4 questions. Explain what is meant by a volunteer sample. Identify 2 strengths of using a volunteer sample in the study. Explain 1 limitation of volunteer sampling. And then explain how the researchers in the above study might obtain a random sample. Give those a go. It's a sampling question. What is meant by a volunteer sample is as you expect. A volunteer sample is one consisting of people who have responded to a general request, for example, an advert to take part in a study. Researchers, they put up adverts, okay? I would see the advert, I go, oh, there's a number to ring or an email to email. Hello there, yeah, I'd like to volunteer to be part of your sample, okay? And that is a volunteer sample. What are 2 strengths of using a volunteer sample? Well, 1 strength in this study is that volunteers are more likely to remain in the study until the baby is 1 year old, whereupon they will be assessed for attachment, okay? If people are volunteering to be part of the study, they're more likely to consent to make it a more longitudinal study and follow up a year later because they want to take part. A second strength is that it tackles one of the ethical issues in the study, consent. Many mothers would not wish to take part, so a volunteer sampling method means only those interested are contacted and others are not bothered by the researchers. 1 easy strength of a volunteer sample that I haven't put is the fact that it's easier because you're getting the participants to come to you and contact you. It's cheaper because you potentially don't have to pay them as well. 3. Explain 1 limitation of volunteer sampling. A limitation of volunteer sampling is that the sample is never representative because most people who volunteer have special characteristics, such as being quite keen to help the researcher. In this study, most mothers would probably not consent to those who do are by definition an unrepresentative sample. Right. Think about those type of people that are likely to volunteer to be part of a research study. Okay, they're going to be keen. They're likely, in this case, they're likely to be stay-at-home mothers. Are we going to get busy people that work long hours and don't have much opportunity to do this? No, they're not going to volunteer to do that type of thing. So therefore, it's not representative of the whole population. You're getting a certain type of person volunteering for your study, and that is a limitation of a volunteer sample. Finally, explain how the researchers in the above study might obtain a random sample. Okay, in the exam, this is usually a 4-mark answer, a 4-mark question which requires a 4-mark answer. Okay, let's have a look. To obtain a random sample, you must first give all the mothers in your target population a number. I would say, first of all, get a list of all of the mothers in the hospital that are having trouble with breastfeeding. You've got your list. Then, number them all from 1 to whatever. You can then use a random number generator to produce some numbers at random, then match the random numbers to those given to the mothers, and the mothers with those numbers will be selected as the sample, depending on however many you need. Let's say a sample of 20, you do 20 random numbers, and then you get your sample of 20. That would be where you get your 4 marks. That is a random sample. And there we go. That was lesson 6, the learning theory of attachment. Next lesson is lesson 7, which is Bowlby's monotropic theory. And there we go, there we have it, right? Well done, my neo-psychologists. Great work today. I'm proud of you all. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills. Cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex. They told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick. Now load up the film.